So as you can see, I have OpenPNP running on an old Lenovo T61 cast-off that someone gave me. I am running Debian 8, I do believe, as the base operating system, and then just loaded the OpenPNP software on top of it. You do need to have Oracle Java, not the default Java that's installed, but if you search around, it was pretty easy to install that and get it configured. Right now, I just sort of have the camera clamped on the machine, looking at a target on top of a half-inch block of aluminum. I'm planning to space my cards off the bed on little, not trays, nests, I guess you'd call them, so that I can put a board on, do the pick and place to it, pull it off, and put another board on, and it'll be exactly in the same location because the nest will have some guide pins and features in it. So back to this. As you can see, the ruler's nice and focused, and the spacing between the two jaws of the caliper is exactly 40 millimeters. So my down-looking camera is 1600 by 1200 pixels, and at that resolution, 40 centimeters is just under 25 micrometers, I do believe, per pixel. The important thing out of this is I can drop, or from reading the forums, they say to target a pixel width of about 50 micrometers. So I'm well below that, so in theory I should be able to drop my camera resolution down by half and still have enough resolution per pixel to get good results. By dropping the resolution in half, that's half the data that needs to go back to the host, which means I can up my frame rate. Currently, there's a little bit of lag, but the frame rate's not too bad. So, I'm just going to run with this for now and see how it goes. I also played with the up-looking camera, which is just stuff behind the laptop somewhere right now. Its resolution is 1280 by 720, so not as much resolution there, but I have a lot more mounting options. So if I go back over to this guy, let's see if I can set this down. There we go. So as you can see, I just sort of have it clamped right in between the two pick and place heads, just for trying this out. And the good news is, with where it's currently focused, there is plenty of clearance from the end of the camera down to the objects I'm viewing. Also, if I put my finger straight down from this point, I'm on the outside of that jaw. So even if my tip is of significant diameter and sticking down, it doesn't crouch into the view of the camera until it gets over to about there. So I got plenty of space, or the view cone has plenty of space for me to pick parts up and hold them and then move them over and try and find the fiducials without the parts actually getting into the frame. If I start getting into some really big FPGAs or something, or bigger flat packs, then it will be an issue because it'll cover up that camera view. But in those cases, you just find the fiducials first, go pick the part, and then blindly go place it, which in theory should work. I haven't played with the software enough to know if they support that or not. Okay, the downside is now I got to figure out how to mount this thing. So let me pan this up a little more. If you look, when this goes up, and there's all the way up, this carriage physically moves up, and, makes sense. But the problem with that is I can't put any sort of mounting structure in this space because it would block this carriage from moving up, which would then block the other carriage from moving down from the way I have it set up. So I'm either going to have to build something that comes from way outside of the path of this, up, over, grabs the camera, then back over and down. Or, nope, I can't go down the middle because if you can see, there's a little plate that hooks the belt to these blocks, and that would hit any sort of structure that went in between the belt. So either I have to come from up here above the belt all the way down, or from either side to the camera and then down. I think I'm going to go either side up, and then a shaft going down that grabs the bottom of the camera and ties somehow back into the bottom of this plate. That way I have 3 points holding the camera, which will keep it from, 2 points at the top would keep it from doing this number, but since that camera is so long, the bottom would want to jiggle around if it wasn't supported. So that third point at the bottom is just going to hold the camera in perpendicular to this plate and keep it from jiggling around too much as the thing moves. It may totally be overkill. Until I have it up and running, I won't know for sure, and by that point I'll be long done building the mounts for the camera. So this little plate is what came originally with the camera for holding it. So if I take this apart quick, how they held the camera was this piece, and it's just a thumb screw on the end, which when tightened down had a little rubber pad that clamped against the body of the camera, and then that just shoved on a rod with some spring clips on the inside to hold it in place, so you could swivel it side to side, lift it up and down with the adjuster knob, and everything just sort of stayed in place. I'm thinking of doing something similar where I'll have a block at the top with maybe a set screw that clamps the camera here, another block at the bottom with a similar set screw that clamps the bottom, and then a third little block and set screw that just, once I set this distance, which is the focal depth or the focus of the camera, which right now it's almost maxed out to get this depth. If I focus it out the other way, it brings the focal depth up towards the camera. So to get that more in range, I might move the camera down slightly so I'm not totally bottomed out at the top end. But anyways, this top block that holds the body with the set screw, I may extend a little bit so I can put a second set screw in it and grab this ring. So I'll get it focused where it needs to be and then drive the set screw in it so it doesn't vibrate and change its focus over time. The camera does have a light in it. I don't know if you can see that on camera. It's reasonably bright, but there's no diffuser on it. So at the very least I need to put a little diffuser on it to sort of spread the light out so I don't get this really bright spot in the middle of the image if the surface is kind of shiny like the aluminum is. So that bottom bracket that clamps the camera, I'm also going to put a couple extra holes in it so I can screw a diffuser in, and if it turns out I don't have enough light with the camera, just from the camera LEDs, I plan to use those same two screws to make my own little LED light card, just a card with a buck boost and a bunch of LEDs on it, and then that would bolt in the same place and then route power back through the machine. Cable length and routing. This cable might actually be too short to make it all the way through and back into the camera through all the looms and whatnot, so I might have to put a USB extension on it, but that's pretty simple, so I'm not going to even worry about that at this time. The focal depth of the camera is pretty good. It'd been nice if it had a little more distance down so I could mount it right where it is and still be right in the middle of the focus range. But even with how it is, I'm definitely going to be below the top of the machine, so I don't have to worry about breaking it off or the cables. And if I have to, I'll slide it down slightly just to give me a little bit more range to play with. I think that's all I have for camera stuff. The software worked, the cameras worked, pretty happy. The next step will be to try and machine and rig up those mounts. So I'm going to get started working on that and come back and record some more status once I get those started. Well, I'm going to try and get started on making the camera mount. So from the last video, I want to try and get this guy mounted somewhere in right about there. But unfortunately, I can't put a post inside this belt because of these two little brackets. They'll run into it. There's basically no clearance between them, which leaves me with putting a bracket across the top and figuring out some way to get a bracket right down here. Now if I slide one of these up, you can see I can screw into that slot right there. So if you look down here, when I slide the slides out of the way, I can access the slot on either side of the idler pulley. But the top of the slide actually extends back almost to within about a quarter, little over 3/8, right around 3/8 of an inch. So whatever piece I make to mount here can only be 3/8 inch tall until it clears the side of this. It has to clear this plate, clear this pulley, and do the same thing on the other side. So I found this little chunk of scrap in my collection. It's about a 1/2 inch thick. So I think I'm going to machine and cut that down to straddle that pulley and stick up enough that at the very least I can thread in a standoff to mount the camera support to the top of it without having to machine a great big huge part out of this, and then maybe make it a little taller and not have to have the standoff. I'm not really sure. The downside is the camera mount has to be all the way above this surface so it doesn't get doesn't follow up the movement of these two guys, you know, hit these little plates. So I'm gonna cut and chop up this little block and try and make that little support piece. We'll cut back in once I got something interesting to look at again. So here's what I came up with. I decided to make the block the full height to clear the top of this surface by just a tiny little bit. So that works out to 1.1 inches. The overhang on each side is 0.4, so each side's cut back 0.4, and this block is slightly narrower than the distance between these two blocks. So that'll give me enough slop side to side to make it fit. And then I made the step on the bottom a 1/4 inch. That should give me enough threads to thread in with a bolt from the back and not pull out, and still clear the underside of the slides. So I'm going to go rough this out on the bandsaw and then chuck it in the lathe or in the mill and clean up all those edges. Back in a bit. Here's that piece after roughing it out and then cleaning it up on the mill. I did end up shrinking this distance. Originally it was a perfect fit between these two blocks, so unless I got it dead nuts on in position between these two, it would not have worked. Also, the thickness of the ears works underneath the slide, so that doesn't bind. So next up, I just laid out where the two holes should be to line up with the center of that slot. As you can see, I'm just catching the edge of this block, and I also need to cut out this semicircle. So I think I'm just going to mill out a pocket the width of this mounting plate, so the pocket ends right there. So this will sort of help align this piece in between these two blocks. So I'll come back once I get those holes drilled. Well, I'll probably just mill this pocket and the relief to clear around the pulley here, because if you can see, it's actually down into this pocket, so I'm going to have to take a big chunk out of this side to clear that as well. I'll cut back in once that's done.